The $64,000 jackpot of the big hit quiz show, The $64,000 Question, was a fortune back then. I'd just gone to work in 1956 as a trainee at Sports Illustrated. Our story is a morality play and as timely and to the point now as then. I learned a lot about good and evil, Charles Van Doren would later say. They are not always what they appear to be. That he was not what he appeared to be stunned the country in a way that had never happened before, and demonstrated as never before what unprecedented potential for deception lay in the new age of television.
In the 1950s, a powerful new medium took hold of America, leaving its signposts on almost every rooftop. Television was replacing the fireplace as the central focus of our homes and our lives. Television sales soared, as did America's fascination with the new programs they watched, especially the most successful and innovative of them all. The first quiz shows with big cash prizes. First quiz shows with big cash prizes.
Ladies and gentlemen, if either player stops the game now, Miss Bowser will win $5,500 more, which means she'll have $11,000. You've just won $69,500. Congratulations again.
The influence of individual shows was suddenly enormous. Television was both our link to reality and our escape from it. The popularity of the quiz shows was unprecedented. People lined up around the block to get a look at the winning contestants, who were their new heroes. The most acclaimed of all was charming and boyish Charles Van Doren, a 30-year-old English instructor and son of a famous literary family. For Charles Van Doren, involvement with quiz shows would lead to scandal and personal tragedy that he would hide from for the rest of his life. The quiz show scandals were one of the most bizarre, disillusioning chapters in the history of broadcasting. The shocking disclosures of quiz show fraud became a signature for an entire decade. President Dwight Eisenhower called the deception a terrible thing to do to the American public. The audience, the medium, and the participants themselves would never be the same.
Did he give you all the questions and all the answers in advance?
Did anyone on the 21 program ever ask you for money?
You knew exactly then what was going to happen on the program before the program went on the air?
As a consequence of what began to unravel in this grand jury room, careers were destroyed, and many went into hiding. Individually, about 100 quiz show contestants and producers, a cross-section of well-educated, decent, middle-class Americans, sat here and perjured themselves. It all began with the $64,000 question.
You're right for $8,000.
Producer Lou Cowan added 3 zeros to the program's $64 top prize.
Revlon, the greatest name in cosmetics, presents The 1, 2,
His creation,
4, 8,
the first big money television game show.
yes, the $64,000 question.
To present the initial questions in a dramatic way, producer Joe Cates placed an IBM sorting machine on stage. It gave the illusion that there was a random selection of questions, when in fact, all the cards were identical.
The questions on which I'm about to break the seal have been carefully guarded in the locked safe deposit vaults of Manufacturers Trust Company, New York. Manufacturers Trust Company certifies that these envelopes were received directly from the editors and that no one has had access to their contents. Not Mr. March, not even I.
Wait a minute.
Virgil, to be fair with you.
MNT, Canyon, Texas.
You're right for $32,000.
The sponsors probably quadrupled their sales in 1 year. You're talking about $100 million.
It's the richest family on the block, you know, right?
Why?
It's the richest family on the block, you know, right?
Why, right. I said, Lou, the only way this show is going to work is if it's rigged, if you fix it.
And the subtle process of manipulating contestants. And the subtle process of manipulating contestants.
Good night, everybody.
Producer Mark Goodson happened to be in the show's production office when a call came in from the sponsor, Charles Revson.
I remember that line. He thinks the Lincoln expert is boring. He wants you to stiff him.
And we'd sit in the sponsors' meetings, and they would say, well, it's that one's got to go on to 64. Or I don't like that one. Let's get rid of them. Futurama!
Within months, Revlon cosmetic sales soared 200%, while the sponsor kept a chart comparing contestants' ratings with product sales.
Please bear with us. They're on the way. Thank you very much.
Revson would always deny any involvement in rigging the program. At the weekly meetings, according to producers, Revson implied that popular contestants who drew large ratings should be kept on the show. A number of steps would be taken to hold on to popular contestants and to get rid of others.
Presented by Revlon.
Revlon had now become the sponsor of the 2 top-rated shows on television.
And remember, if it's the finest of its kind, it's by Revlon.
It was a con game, that's all. It was a con game, that's all. Scam, from start to finish. Well, I was furious about the whole thing. I refused to take the check at the time. I contacted Time Magazine, the New York Times. They didn't want to talk to me. The consensus of most everyone I knew was, why knock it? Makes no difference. You can put on a good show. You can help yourself. You can help those with whom you're associated. Let them be proud of you. And never mind the fact that there was any fraud involved. Who cares?
Tic-tac-toe. And here is your host, Jay Jackson.
More and more producers copied the quiz show formula. Newspapers and magazines began to publish weekly tallies of quiz show winnings as if they were the latest baseball scores.
In that period of time, say in the 50s, there was a tremendous proliferation of games. People think there are a lot of game shows on the air today. It's not true. There must have been 30 on the air in the 50s.
This is Eddie Hodges, the 10-year-old schoolboy, and here is his partner, Major John Glenn Jr., the Marine Corps jet pilot.
Well, the quiz shows in the 1950s were probably the biggest thing that ever hit television. I mean, 60% of the entire country were watching quiz shows. At one time, of the top 5 rated shows on television, all of them were quiz shows.
The Big Surprise. And here's your $100,000 host, Mike Wallace.
I think we have to realize that $100,000 in the late 50s, $100,000 would be equivalent to somebody going on television today and winning, let's say, $600,000.
Who is our first big surprise star?
So it's getting over $500,000 to appear. So it's not, we're talking about the transformation of people's lives monetarily, becoming almost millionaires.
Returning with $140,300.
But although the contestants made hundreds of thousands of dollars, and the networks made millions of dollars, and the sponsors made tens of millions of dollars, and the producers were getting quite wealthy, and all was right with the world. And all was right with the world.
With a group of youngsters, if you want, I'm sorry, I took the tough question instead of the easy one. Here it is.
21 would take the ultimate step in quiz show rigging. Most contestants were cast as though they were actors, every detail carefully orchestrated. Contestants were now full partners in the deception.
Me something in essence which was like, play ball and we'll make sure you make $25,000. I said, fine, what do I have to do? He says, first of all, he says, you're going to be on the program tomorrow night.
How do you, because you have to take care of them, how do you manage to support yourself and your family?
Well, I get $160 a month from the GI Bill of Rights from the Veterans Administration.
The whole idea was to make me appear like an ex-GI working his way through college. The reason I had been asked to put on this old, ill-fitting suit and get this Marine-type haircut was to make me appear as what you would call today a nerd, a square.
Well, it's a very personal question to ask, and it sounds very, very rough what you do.
Yes, things are not so good, but...
I was never to call the Master of Ceremonies, Jack Barry, Jack. I was always to call him Mr. Barry and be very, very humble and very sheepish.
How many do you want to try for?
I'll try 11.
The hardest part of the show was not remembering the answers or knowing the answers, but rather remembering mop your brow twice, count to 10, and breathe heavily. This was the hardest part of the show, was remembering the stage directions which Enright had choreographed.
You have scored 21 points. You have scored 21 points.
We often turned off the air conditioning in the isolation booths so that they would start to perspire. And we did coach them in terms of what dramatic pauses to take, when to ask for a question to be repeated, when to miss a question, and sometimes they would deliberately miss a question in order to heighten the drama of the moment.
Mr. Semple, can you come back here next week, meet your next opponent, and tell us whether you want to...
As weeks went by, people began to recognize me more and more. I got more and more fan mail. My classmates at college were very proud of me. My professors were proud of me. I just couldn't hold this inside of me, though, because I was overjoyed about being a celebrity, winning and so forth. I was overwhelmed.
I'm Jack Barry. For 6 weeks here on 21, a 29-year-old GI college student, Herbert Stemple, has successfully beaten all of his opponents and has run his winnings up to $69,500.
Then Dan Enright said to me, "You know, Herb, you're not going to get all the money that you've won so far or are going to win." I said, "What? What do you mean?" He says, "No," he says, "we have to look out for ourselves. So I have a paper here which you're going to have to sign." I realized that if I didn't sign, I might not find myself on the program too much longer, so I decided to sign.
Even though Stemple had agreed to accept less money, it didn't matter. His ratings had begun to fall, and he had to go. A new contestant was moved into the challenger's booth to knock him off. A college instructor with a flair for acting, who would become by far the most acclaimed of all quiz show contestants.
He appeared on the show. Everybody responded to him positively. He was a kind of guy that you'd love to have your daughter marry to. Attractive, likable, good sense of humor. And he just captured everyone's imagination. His name was Charles Van Doren.
My father would know that.
His father was a Pulitzer Prize-winning poet. His mother was a celebrated novelist. His uncle, a respected American historian. Van Doren's erudition provided parents with a welcomed antidote to Elvis Presley at a time when Americans feared education was in decline. Charles Van Doren presented a portrait of elegant New England charm. He and his family symbolized the ideals of integrity and intellectual achievement that seemed beyond reproach.
He teaches English at Columbia University. He was a student at Cambridge University in England. He has written 3 books and is currently working on...
And very soon, the viewers lined themselves up on the side of Van Doren. He was a hero.
Just out of curiosity, Mr. Van Doren, are you related in any way to Mark Van Doren, up at Columbia University, the famous writer?
Yes, I am. He's my father.
He is your father?
Yeah.
Well, the name Van Doren is a very well-known name. You're related to any of the other well-known Van Dorens?
Well, Dorothy Van Doren, the novelist and author of the recent The Country Wife, is my mother.
Mm-hmm.
And Carl Van Doren, the biographer of Benjamin Franklin, the historian, is my uncle.
Well, you have every reason in the world to be mighty proud of your name and your family.
The lines were clearly drawn. There was the hero, there was the villain. And everybody knew whom they were rooting for and whom they were rooting against.
What'll it be?
I'll take a chance.
You will take a chance.
When Van Doren was approached to appear on the program and was also told that he would be coached, his first reaction was negative. He did not want to be part of it. And frankly, we induced him to do it by convincing him that it would help glamorize information. It would help glamorize intellectualism.
Winston Churchill wrote a series of 6...
His name became synonymous with the quiz shows, and his impact was immediate. We played the games between Van Doren and Stemple for quite a while, a series of ties, and the drama grew and the tension rose.
Lines stretched around the studio as the ratings skyrocketed. Tens of millions gathered in every part of the country. to see if their new hero, Charles Van Doren, would beat Herb Stempel. Week after week, the drama and tension grew as Enright wrote the final act. No one seemed to question what they saw. In the 1950s, seeing was believing.
And then finally, at a particular moment, I told Herb Stempel that he was going to be losing that night to Charles Van Doren. He asked me whether he could not forego the losing and whether he could not play against Van Doren clean, and I said no. And I reminded him he had given me his word that when I would ask him to lose, he would lose.
I was absolutely taken aback. I was shocked. I was horrified. All this celebrity business had gone to my head, and I didn't want to lose. I felt that I wanted to play this game honestly, if necessary, to try to stay on. I was willing to take my chances. But Enright said, no, you cannot do it. We've decided, and you're going to have to lose.
Good evening. I'm Jack Barry. Tonight here on 21, Herbert Stempel, our 29-year-old GI college student, can win $111,500, the highest amount of money ever to be won on television.
On the day I was due to lose to Van Doren, I sat home watching television in the morning. Every few minutes, an announcer would break in on WNBC saying, is Herb Stempel going to win over $100,000 tonight? And I said, no, he's not going to win $100,000. He's going to take a dive.
Catherine Howard.
Right, and what happened to her?
What happened to her? Considering Henry VIII, he probably divorced her or beheaded her. Considering Henry VIII, he probably divorced her or beheaded her. Well, he divorced her. Did he behead Catherine Howard?
He did. You've got 18 points.
The night Charles Van Doren beat Herb Stempel, about 15 million viewers applauded Van Doren's triumph. As the nation's new hero, Charlie made the cover of Time, a distinction never bestowed on his illustrious father or uncle. Admiring students at Columbia University, where he taught English, put up signs directing visitors to the smartest man in the world. He received thousands of letters a week, including hundreds of marriage proposals.
Charlie, incidentally, I've had a lot of questions about you, about whether or not you're married or single.
I'm single.
You are, eh? Are you in the market, so to speak?
I don't know if you'd put it so commercially. I'm in the market, yes.
He signed the $50,000 a year contract to become a host on the Today Show. And signed the $50,000 a year contract to become a host on the Today Show, and gave personal interviews to some 500 reporters. As book, lecture, and movie offers were waved in Van Doren's face, a resentful Herb Stempel would never forget how he had faded into the shadow of Van Doren's celebrity.
That evening, as had been rehearsed, I took my dive and left the program. As I walked backstage, two technicians were talking, and one said to the other one, at least we finally have a clean-cut intellectual on this program, not a freak with a sponge memory. I was appalled. I was hurt, as if somebody had taken a knife and shoved it right into me.
There was always a fear. There was always a fear lurking that somehow the story would be exposed, that we would be revealed. And that kept gnawing at us. But after a while, you rationalize that by thinking to yourself, what contestant would reveal that he played a part in the rigging? And certainly we would not reveal that. We never took into account that contestant might reveal his role in rigging because he might be subjected to such trauma and such hurt that it would overcome whatever reluctance he had to tell the truth.
I first contacted Jack O'Brien, who was a columnist for the Journal American who covered television, and I told him the story. He believed me, but he didn't want to. He printed little tidbits in his column once in a while about different things, but he would never come out directly and accuse them of perpetrating a hoax on the people.
Ultimately, one day I get a phone call from the Journal American, and the chief operator said that there was a fellow named Herb Stempel who wanted to talk to me. So he talked to me for 4 hours. At first, I thought it might be a crank. I thought it might be a phony. But everything hung together in his story.
And sure enough, within 2 days, I received a phone call from a newspaper saying that they had been advised by a contestant who had appeared on the show that the show was rigged. I asked them if that person was Herb Stempel, and they said yes, it was.
And we could never get it printed in flat, factual terms because the lawyers for my newspaper syndicate wouldn't touch it until we had absolute proof.
It could not be printed because there was no real corroboration from anybody else who had been on the show. When the story finally did come out, it's because after a while, when the Dotto scandal broke, newspapers finally decided to print the story.
Dotto. And here's the star of Dotto, Jack Nars.
Jack Nars, who was unaware of the rigging, became host of the show that would bring down all the big money quiz shows and mark the end of an era.
Fate is a strange thing, isn't it? A successful thing like that show. 2 million or more a week sending in postcards to the show. Climbing to the heights, #1 rating nighttime. Millions and millions of people watching it. Everything just sailing along fantastically well. And then some guy opens up a notebook that's about that big and sees some answers, and everything ends. What happened on this show, there was a standby contestant backstage, a fellow by the name of Hilgemeyer. In this dressing room that all the contestants shared, he saw this lady in a corner making notes in a notebook and keeping rather to herself. Suddenly somebody came in from the show and said, "You're on next." And I introduced her, and she became a contestant on the show.
Welcomes back our new champion from New York, Miss Marie Wynn.
I'm on stage now at this point out there doing a show live. This fellow, who was a standby contestant, followed her out and stood in the wings. He noticed that she was giving the answers rather smoothly.
The Castle of Amontillado.
You are right.
Looked too pat. He went back into the dressing room and there spotted this notebook that this lady had been writing in. He opened it up, and there were the answers in the notebook that she was giving to the questions on stage at that moment.
She is right. Yes.
Armed with the pages of the notebook, this standby contestant went to the press and told a newspaper reporter. The reporter called CBS. CBS, I guess, decided to look at a kinescope of a show, and they matched the answers on this sheet of paper to the answers that she gave on the show, and I guess they were a little too pat, and they decided, well, this looks like it's rigged, and they took the show off the air immediately. That was the end of it.
Dotto opened the floodgates. Now all the quiz shows were subject to investigation. The shows fell like 10 pins in a bowling alley, one right after the other. Ratings plummeted. The top-rated $64,000 question dropped to 73rd place. Rumors resurfaced about 21. For the first time, Herb Stempel's charges would be taken seriously. At a sensational press conference, Dan Enright played a secretly made tape recording of a conversation he had with Herb Stemple. This tape was presented to the press to demonstrate that Stemple was mentally unstable. To further discredit Stemple, was mentally unstable. To further discredit Stemple, Enright also produced a letter that Stemple had signed at an earlier date, saying that 21 was an honest program, that Barry and Enright were beyond reproach, and that no rigging had taken place.
I was a damn fool to have signed such a thing, to have agreed to such a thing, when you again held out the prospects of jobs and money and this and that to me, and I succumbed to this.
Dan Enright was the supervising producer of the show, and I was the head of programming at NBC at the time of the scandal. In the course of our investigation, Dan came to see me in my office at NBC. And when I put it to him very bluntly, was he involved? Was the show honest? Dan became quite upset, almost to the point of tears, and denied that he had had any part in fixing the show.
But as the investigation proceeded, I began to realize that there was some undercurrent. Someone was advising them not to tell the truth. Someone was advising them not to tell the truth.
Not only did some of the producers lie to the grand jury, but they also had urged contestants to perjure themselves. In Lower Manhattan, the grand jury was convened for 9 months, and heard over 150 witnesses. A majority of them, about 100 contestants, lied under oath. As a lone voice, Herb Stempel continued telling the truth to anyone who would listen. But it was Stempel's word against everyone else. There was still no corroborating evidence. Stempel's testimony to the DA and to the grand jury implied that Charles Van Doren was part of the fraud. But Van Doren, still the most acclaimed and respected of all the contestants, continued to insist that he and the show were honest. Of all those involved, the stakes were especially high for Van Doren. No one wanted to believe that he was guilty.
Everywhere he went, he was recognized, he was applauded. The nuns in convent would pray for his success every week. And I don't think he had any concept, nor even the producers had any concept of how big this was going to become. And he told me he felt like he was in the middle of this huge bull ring with hundreds of thousands of people cheering him on, and all he wanted to do was get out. But he couldn't get out.
Suddenly, to everyone's surprise, the grand jury testimony was sealed from the public.
The grand jury testimony was sealed from the public.
By Judge Mitchell Schweitzer.
By Judge Mitchell Schweitzer.
An unprecedented move in New York State by a judge whose intentions are still not clear. At the time, it was feared that the public might never learn what the grand jury had uncovered. Suspicious of a cover-up, Congress called an immediate investigation. Once just a trivial form of entertainment, quiz shows were now the subject of investigation at the highest level of government. One of the early witnesses was child actress Patty Duke, who had appeared with another child contestant on the $64,000 challenge.
They coached Patty Duke in the answers. That's when she was about 12. 3 years later, she was about 15, she was summoned to testify, and she was coached again. And she went down, and she testified, and she lied until she was ready to step down, when one of the avuncular senators looked at her and said, "Now, Patty, is everything you told us here today the truth?" At which point she broke down and started to cry and said, "No." And they put her back on the stand, and then she told the whole story. It was the most poignant and startling demonstration of how widespread and deep this sort of corruption had led us.
As the investigation was underway, the potential star witness, Charles Van Doren, now a host on the Today Show, was under pressure from NBC to testify. But to avoid the committee's subpoena, Van Doren went into hiding. It was a relatively obscure 21 contestant by the name of James Snodgrass who would finally provide indisputable supporting proof that 21 had been rigged. Snodgrass had documented every detail of the rigging in a series of registered letters he mailed to himself.
I didn't think it was terribly wrong, but something told me that I had better cover my ass on this.
1 month after the hearings began, Charles Van Doren emerged from hiding.
I said to the committee this morning that I was kind of like a child who refuses to admit a fact in the hope that it'll go away. I got panic-stricken. I've been afraid for a long time. I've been living in a kind of dread for 3 years. They have not been a happy 3 years. But I became almost panic-stricken then. And I didn't act very well in the next week.
Eventually, an anguished Charles Van Doren, one producer, and 17 other contestants were formally charged, arrested, and convicted of lying under oath to the New York grand jury. All pleaded guilty. All received suspended sentences. None served time in jail. None served time in jail. The district attorney estimated that at least 100 others who testified with Van Doren, 2/3 of all those who faced the grand jury, had perjured themselves. The television quiz show scandal had wide-ranging consequences. Quiz producers were unofficially blacklisted for years and forced out of television. Many contestants, in disgrace, hid from their past. networks took control of programs away from the sponsors, and federal regulations were enacted against broadcast fraud. The scandal left us feeling betrayed. Television had entered tens of millions of homes and lives in an era filled with trust. And the violation of that trust changed our view of a new medium in an age we still like to think of as innocent.